we count down the 10 deadliest gunslingers in the history of the Old West, as voted by our channel fans. Fasten your seatbelts, folks. This ride is going to be wild. First up on our list of the deadliest gunslingers in the Old West is a name that's been highly requested in our previous videos. Number 10. Doc Holliday, the deadliest dentist and gunslinger of the Old West. You've probably heard of him before, and that's no surprise. Doc Holliday has garnered a lot of attention, and for good reason. John Henry Holliday, better known as Doc Holliday, was a man of many talents and even more mysteries. Did you know that before he became a renowned gambler and quick-draw gunfighter, Doc actually earned a DDS degree in dentistry? Yes, he was a dentist, but life had other plans for him. At just 15 years old, Doc was diagnosed with tuberculosis. Heartbroken and fearing a fate like his late mother, who also succumbed to TB, he sought a different climate to fight the disease. During his travels, he befriended the legendary Wyatt Earp and his family. In 1880, he followed Wyatt to Tombstone, Arizona, and found himself tangled in the famous gunfight at the Oakley Corral. That shootout left several men dead and wounded, and Doc himself took a gunshot to the hip. But that wasn't the end of his gunslinging days. When Wyatt Earp's brother Morgan was killed, a feud erupted between Wyatt and his brother's killers. Doc Holliday, being the loyal friend he was, rode alongside Wyatt for years, seeking vengeance. Let me tell you, during those years, plenty of killings happened. Doc might have had a deadly reputation, but he didn't head west just for his health. No, it was more likely his temper and quick trigger finger that got him into trouble back in Georgia, forcing him to leave home. Here's a fascinating fact. Did you know that Margaret Mitchell, author of Gone with the Wind, was actually related to Doc Holliday? And guess what? Doc was quite the romantic at heart. He had a thing for his cousin, Maddie Holliday, and even though she became a nun, the two kept in touch throughout their lives. Now let's talk about his gunslinging skills. While Doc shot many people in his life, it's important to note that most of those shootings were in self-defense. His signature move was to aim for his assailant's shooting arm, disarming them and inflicting a wound that, while painful, was not fatal. Doc died penniless at the young age of 36 in Glenwood Springs, but he sure had an eventful life. He owned a dental practice, a saloon, and even a silver mine. And here's a fun fact. Doc once said Frederick Walker Pitkin saved his life. Who's Pitkin, you ask? Well, he became the governor of Colorado in 1879. When the law came knocking, wanting to extradite Doc back to Arizona for murder charges, Pitkin refused, citing a technical error in the paperwork. As Doc's health declined from tuberculosis, he sought one last hope to cure his illness in the Indian medicine vapor caves of Glenwood Springs. It was there, seeking solace and perhaps absolution, that he sought the counsel of Father Downey, the founding priest of St. Stephen's Catholic Church. Despite what you might have seen in the movies, Doc didn't actually kill cowboy gang member Johnny Ringo. In fact, his longtime mistress, Big-Nosed Kate, ran away with Ringo for a time. It's believed that Doc killed no less than 10 men while riding with Wyatt Earp during the infamous Vendetta ride. Want to hear more tales from the Wild West? Next, we move to number 9 on our list of the deadliest gunslingers in the Old West. Number 9. Johnny Ringo, the lesser-known gunslinger with a dark past. You might have heard his name before, but did you know the full story behind this lesser-known gunslinger? It all started on that fateful day in 1864 when tragedy struck the Ringo family on the California Trail. Johnny's father, William Ringo, met with a fatal accident, leaving his widow to care for 5 children, with Johnny being the oldest. Witnessing his father's gruesome death at just 14 years old had a profound impact on young Johnny. Legend has it that even at that tender age, Johnny was already a crack shot with a pistol and rifle. Maybe he wanted to ensure he'd never repeat his father's clumsy mistake, or maybe he simply had a talent for handling firearms. Either way, he was on his way to becoming a gunslinger. Not much is known about his life until 1875, when Johnny appeared in Texas, getting himself into trouble over a range war and threatening lawmen. He had a knack for finding, or causing, trouble, and his wanderings took him to Tombstone, Arizona, and New Mexico. People who knew him described Johnny as a moody loner, but there's an interesting twist. He was also known for reciting Shakespeare. Some even speculated he might have been college educated, but it's more likely he was just a well-read desperado. In 1879, Johnny Ringo found himself back in Tombstone, where the famous Earp brothers and the infamous Doc Holliday crossed his path. Remember the iconic scene from the movie Tombstone, where Johnny Ringo, portrayed by Michael Biehn, spins his six-shooter while facing off with a nonchalant Doc Holliday, played by Val Kilmer? Well, in reality, while they did want to shoot each other, they didn't get the chance during the infamous Oak Coral Showdown. They happened to miss each other that day. But life took a dark turn for Johnny in 1882. He was drinking more than usual, talking about a sense of impending death. On July 14th, his lifeless body was discovered against the base of an oak tree in Turkey Creek Canyon near Tombstone, with a gunshot wound to the head. The official verdict was suicide, but rumors swirled. Wyatt Earp even claimed he was the one who did it. It's possible one of Johnny's many enemies put an end to him, while others believe Doc Holliday might have been the shooter. We may never know the whole truth, but one thing's for sure. Johnny Ringo's life was a wild ride full of danger and mystery. Who knows what he could have become had he not witnessed his father's violent death on that fateful day. Number 8. Bass Reeves, the man who inspired the Lone Ranger. His story is the stuff of legends, and you won't believe all the incredible facts that make him a perfect fit for the Yellowstone universe. Let's start at the beginning. Bass Reeves was born before the Civil War in July 1838. Born into slavery, he and his family were owned by a man named William Steele Reeves. Later, his owner's son, Colonel George R. Reeves, forced him to join the Confederate Army when the Civil War broke out. But Bass wasn't one to be held captive for long. He escaped and lived as a fugitive among the Creek and Seminole tribes in Indian Territory. Here's where his story gets even more fascinating. After the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, Reeves moved to Van Buren, Arkansas, where he bought land, became a farmer, and married Nellie Jenny. Talk about a true family man. Together, they had a total of 11 children. But the most groundbreaking part of Bass Reeves' life was when he became the first black deputy U.S. Marshal west of the Mississippi River in 1875. Federal Judge Isaac Parker of the Western District of Arkansas commissioned Reeves as a deputy marshal. His deep knowledge of Indian Territory and fluency in the Creek and Seminole languages made him the perfect man to apprehend wanted fugitives. And boy, did he excel at his job. Reeves served for over 30 years and brought over 3,000 criminals to justice. Yes, you heard that right. He took down 14 outlaws and was known for bringing in some of the most dangerous fugitives. One of his most epic feats was tracking outlaw Tom Story for 5 whole years before finally facing him in a legendary gunfight. Here's what's truly astonishing. Despite being born into slavery and never receiving a formal education, Reeves didn't let that hold him back. He was illiterate his whole life, but he used his incredible memory to memorize the warrants that were read to him by federal judges or court officials. Talk about ingenuity. But that's not all. Reeves was not only a tough and fearless lawman, but he was also known for his integrity and fairness. He arrested his own church minister for selling illegal alcohol, and when his own son became a fugitive, Reeves went on a weeks-long manhunt to track him down and bring him to justice. Now that's dedication. His incredible career as a marshal eventually came to an end in 1907 when the state of Oklahoma took over policing duties in Indian Territory. But Bass Reeves wasn't done yet. At the age of 69, he became a policeman for the city of Muskogee, Oklahoma. He continued to serve the law until his death at age 71 from Bright's disease, also known as nephritis. That is the epic tale of Bass Reeves, one of the greatest American frontiersmen of all time. Number 7. Frank Buckskin Lesley, the notorious gunslinger. Hold on to your hats. Folks, this story is going to take you on one heck of a ride. Buckskin Frank, as he was nicknamed, always rocked a buckskin jacket while working as a scout for the U.S. Army in Texas, Oklahoma, and the Dakotas during the 1870s. But that wasn't the only thing that made him stand out. He was just 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighed 135 pounds, But don't let his size fool you. This man had a reputation as a top-notch gunfighter with a pair of six-shooters at his hips that could rival even Doc Holliday's legendary skills. When Frank rolled into Tombstone, Arizona in 1880, the town was a hopped of outlaws and rowdy characters. But he fit right in with the rowdy crowd, quick to show off his shooting abilities by blasting holes in the ceilings of saloons. Yes, he was quite the showman. But let me tell you, Buckskin Frank was not someone you'd want to mess with. He had a fiery temper, especially when he had a few too many drinks. Even among the notorious rabble of Tombstone, he stood out for his swiftness with his gun. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Frank had a thing for a lady named May Colleen, who was separated from her husband, Mike. But Mike was one jealous hombre, and he made it clear that he'd shoot any man he caught with May. Well, wouldn't you know it, he caught Frank with May on the porch of the Cosmopolitan Hotel, and things took a deadly turn. Mike confronted Frank, and well, let's just say that Mike wound up 6 feet under. The killing was ruled as self-defense, and just a week later, Frank and May tied the knot. After the infamous gunfight at the Oakley Corral, Frank found himself in the middle of more trouble. He got into a heated argument with Billy Claiborne, a survivor of the shootout. Billy was demanding to be called Billy the Kid after the famous outlaw William Bonney, but others weren't taking him too seriously. When Billy got rowdy with Frank, things turned violent, and the two had a gun battle right outside the Oriental Saloon. Frank got the upper hand, and Billy ended up dead. Lesley walked up to him, and the wounded man said, "Don't shoot me anymore. I'm killed." His friends took him to the doctor, where he died 6 hours later. Allegedly, his last words were, "Frank Lesley killed John Ringo. I saw him do it." But the drama didn't stop there. Frank had his share of love woes too. His relationship with Molly Williams, a young singer and prostitute, was passionate, but also filled with whiskey-fueled fights. It all came to a head one day in 1889 when Frank shot Molly in the head. She died, but Frank also took a shot at another man named Six-Shooter Jim, who survived and later testified against Frank. Well, Buckskin Frank's violent ways finally caught up with him, and he got sentenced to 25 years in Yuma prison. But guess what? He only served 7 years before winning parole, all thanks to a lady named Belle Stoll, who helped him out. They even got hitched and had themselves a grand honeymoon in China. After getting out of prison, Frank took on a quieter life, but that didn't stop him from getting into a bit of gold rush action in Alaska. Eventually, he settled in California and ran a pool hall. But then he vanished from public records in 1922, and nobody is sure how or where he met his end. Some say he may have ended up broken and homeless, passing away in San Francisco in 1930. Number 6. Or in Porter Rockwell, the Destroying Angel. This guy was quite the character, and his story is full of twists and turns that'll leave you wondering what's fact and what's fiction. Let's take a ride through some curious facts about Porter Rockwell. First off, this guy was one deadly gunslinger. They called him the Destroying Angel, and for good reason. He took down more outlaws than some of the most famous gunslingers combined. I'm talking Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, Tom Horn, and Bat Masterson all rolled into one. Heck, he once even shot a bank robber on horseback in pitch-black darkness. No one messed with Porter Rockwell without getting a taste of lead. Here's the twist, though. Despite his tough-as-nails exterior, Porter was a fiercely loyal member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He was like a guardian angel to Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, serving as their bodyguard and personal messenger. When Joseph was stuck in Liberty Jail, guess who helped him try to break out? You guessed it, Porter Rockwell. He was the man behind getting 2 augers into the jail so the prophet could chisel his way to freedom. Oh, and get this. Porter Rockwell had one heck of a prophecy going for him. After some rough times in Missouri, Joseph Smith told him that as long as he didn't cut his hair and remain true to the gospel, no enemy could touch him. And you know what? The prophecy held true time and time again. Porter escaped deadly showdowns without a scratch. One sharpshooter even emptied both his guns at Porter in broad daylight, and it didn't even ruffle his feathers. Now, here's a real twist in the tale. Porter Rockwell went to jail, but not for the reasons you might think. Brigham Young sent him on a mission to Nauvoo, and get this, he wanted Porter to get himself arrested. Yes, the plan was to shift persecution away from the saints left behind, and Porter was more than happy to oblige. He staged a wild stunt, barricading himself in an old boarding house, and it worked like a charm. The saints stayed in peace, and Porter got acquitted once again. But not everything was sunshine and roses in Porter's life. He was involved in some mysterious cases, like the Aiken brothers' murders. Charged with slowing down Johnson's army, Porter had to escort the Aiken brothers out of Utah, and well, things went south. Two of the brothers ended up dead in the desert, and no one knows for sure what happened. Some blame Plains Indians, while others point fingers at Porter Rockwell. But hang on, it gets crazier. Porter shot Brigham Young's own nephew, Lot Huntington, after a horse theft turned into a deadly standoff. You don't mess with this man, that's for sure. Now, despite all the drama, Porter Rockwell remained a faithful Latter-day Saint till the very end. He was one of the first members of the church and never wavered in his loyalty to Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. In the face of slander and accusations, President Joseph F. Smith praised Porter in his tribute, saying he had gone to heaven as a true saint. Number 5. Annie Oakley, the Little Sure Shot. We're talking about a true legend of the Wild West, Annie Oakley. Born as Phoebe Ann Moses, but known to all as Annie. This girl led a remarkable life, from humble beginnings to becoming a sharpshooting sensation. Annie's life started out rough when her father passed away, leaving her mother with 6 kids and not much else. After a couple of remarriages, young Annie found herself helping out at the Darke County Infirmary. She was a real go-getter, and by the time she was 15, she was hunting game with her father's old rifle and making enough money to pay off her mother's mortgage. But here's where things got really interesting. One day, a guy named Jack Frost saw her shooting skills and invited her to a shooting contest against a well-known marksman, Frank E. Butler. Annie gave it her all and beat the guy with a perfect score. Well, you know what happened next. She and Frank fell in love and got hitched. Annie and Frank joined forces and started performing together in shows. But it wasn't until they joined Buffalo Bill's Wild West that Annie truly became a star. She was the star of the show, the champion markswoman, and Frank was right there beside her as her manager and assistant. They made quite the team. Now, here's a fun fact. When the Wild West toured Europe, Annie caught the eye of none other than the legendary Lakota leader Sitting Bull. He was mighty impressed with her shooting skills and her down-to-earth demeanor, so he called her Little Sure Shot. Now that's a nickname you can be proud of. Annie and Frank had quite the successful run with the Wild West, but eventually, they decided to leave the show and settle down in Maryland. They even adopted a pup named Dave, who became a part of their act. Talk about a talented dog. Annie would shoot apples right off of Dave's head. But Annie's adventurous spirit didn't stop there. When World War I broke out, she offered to raise a regiment of women volunteers to fight, and she volunteered to teach marksmanship to the troops. She was one fierce lady, I'll tell you that. Sadly, Annie and Frank were in a terrible car accident that left them both injured. It took Annie quite some time to recover, but she bounced back and was performing again. Unfortunately, her health started to fail, and she and Frank moved back to her hometown in Ohio to be near family. In the end, after a long and adventure-filled life, Annie and Frank passed away just weeks apart. Number 4. Bill Longley, the Texas Terror. Bill Longley, or should I say Wild Bill, Rattling Bill, Tom Jones, Jim Patterson, Jim Webb, Bill Black, Bill Henry, or Bill Jackson. He sure had a bunch of aliases. Now, Bill Longley was born in Texas back in 1851, and let me tell you, he was one mean hombre right from the start. At the tender age of 16, he killed his first man, and there was no turning back from there. He had some really strong racist views and was dead set against the Reconstruction policy after the Civil War. That kind of trouble was bound to catch up with him eventually. Bill was one fast and deadly gunslinger, and he had a long list of victims to prove it. He had a reputation for taking down anyone he suspected of being a Yankee sympathizer or a carpetbagger. When a police officer insulted his father, Bill stepped forward and told the man to lower his gun. The lawman was unaware of Bill's accuracy, so he raised his gun and pointed it at young Bill, who shot him to death. Longley began terrorizing newly freed slaves and killed 2 more black men in Lexington, Texas, soon after. Joining up with other young men on December 20, 1868, Longley, Johnson McCown, and James Gilmore killed Green Evans, one of 3 ex-slaves they intercepted from Bell County. He and his brother-in-law, John W. Wilson, terrorized black families in south-central Texas for the next 2 years. But here's a twist. Bill had a close call with death himself when he was captured by a mob and nearly lynched as a horse thief. One man, however, turned and shot several shots at the pair. As the mob rode off, a bullet struck Longley, broke a tooth, and another frayed the rope from which he was hanging. The rope broke, and he managed to escape with his life. Longley and his brother-in-law, John W. Wilson, killed a black man named Bryce in Bastrop County in February 1870. There was also a charge against them for killing a black woman. Military authorities offered a $1,000 reward for the pair in March. His brother-in-law, Wilson, died soon after, and Longley traveled north. This outlaw's trail of violence didn't end there. He kept on the run, killing innocent people all over the place. He claimed he was part of an outlaw gang and even worked as a trail driver in Kansas, where he killed his boss after a disagreement. He sure had a knack for getting himself into trouble, I'll tell you that. But the law finally caught up with him, and after a series of trials and letters to the newspapers claiming he killed 32 men, he was sentenced to hang. Can you believe he even asked for clemency, comparing his case to the infamous John Wesley Hardin? On the day of his execution, Bill had a sense of humor. He joked about fixing a board before he went up the gallows, saying he wouldn't want to trip and break his neck. But when the hangman did his thing, fate had other plans. Bill landed on his feet, and they had to fix the situation before he finally met his end. Number 3. Bat Masterson, the Buffalo hunter turned lawman. You might not see him standing in that imaginary Hall of Fame with Wild Bill Hickok and Buffalo Bill, but trust me, he deserves his own spot up there. Bat was a man of many talents and adventures. Born up north in Canada, he found his way to the wild open plains of Kansas at a young age. Now, he started his career hunting buffalo, and let me tell you, he had quite the reputation as a buffalo hunter. But that's just the beginning of his wild journey. In 1874, when he was just 20 years old, he found himself in a harrowing showdown at Adobe Walls in Texas. He and a bunch of other buffalo hunters fought off hundreds of hostile Native Americans, and they came out on top, killing as many as 70 of them. Now, that's one heck of a story that spread like wildfire, making Bat a true hero of the West. But of course, being a gunslinger, Bat found himself in a good old-fashioned shootout soon enough. It happened in a Texas bar and involved a woman, as these things often do. In the end, Bat took down his opponent, a cavalry soldier named Melvin King, but he came out of it with a limp that people say he carried for the rest of his life. Now, Dodge City was Bat's stomping ground, and boy, was it a wild place. Saloons, gambling halls, brothels, you name it. Wyatt Earp himself approached Bat and convinced him to become a lawman, and sure enough, he became the sheriff of Ford County. He took down outlaws, formed posses, and had a reputation that made folks think twice before messing with him. But like any good story, there were ups and downs. Bat's time as sheriff came to an end, but that didn't stop him from being a gunfighter, getting into scrapes, and wandering all over the West. He was a man of many interests, sports, gambling, you name it. He even became a sports writer and hobnobbed with boxers and athletes. But Masterson was a curious soul, always looking for what's next, never afraid to take risks. That's what makes him such a legendary figure of the American West. He lived life to the fullest, and everyone always had a tale to tell about him. Number 2. The Sundance Kid, Butch Cassidy's partner in crime. One of the most notorious outlaws in the American Old West, the Sundance Kid's real name was Harry Alonzo Longabaugh. Born in Pennsylvania in 1867, he was the youngest of 5 siblings and had quite the adventurous spirit. At just 15 years old, He headed west in a covered wagon with his cousin George. But trouble found him, and in 1887, he stole a gun, horse, and saddle, landing himself in jail for 18 months. It was during this time that he earned the nickname the Sundance Kid. After getting out of jail, he went back to work as a ranch hand, and by 1891, he was up in Canada working at the Bar U Ranch. But his life took a different turn when he got mixed up in some train and bank robberies. He joined the infamous Wild Bunch, which included his partner in crime, Butch Cassidy. Now, Sundance was known for being quick with a gun, but interestingly enough, he wasn't known to have killed anyone before a later shootout in Bolivia, where he and Butch Cassidy were believed to have met their end. You see, there was another outlaw in the gang called Kid Curry, real name Harvey Logan, who was quite the gunslinger, taking down numerous men. So sometimes, people got mixed up and referred to Sundance as the Kid. The gang had a hideout in Wyoming called the Hole in the Wall, where they planned their heists and could strike and retreat with ease. Pinkerton detectives were hot on their trail, making things difficult for the Wild Bunch. So, in 1901, Sundance, along with his wife Etta Place and Butch Cassidy, decided it was time to leave the United States. They set sail for Buenos Aires, Argentina, seeking fresh robbing grounds and some time to cool off. Now, you might have seen portrayals of the gang as non-violent in Hollywood movies, but let me tell you, that's not entirely true. They had their share of bloodshed, and there were "Wanted Dead or Alive" posters plastered all over the county with a hefty reward of $30,000 for information leading to their capture or death. They sailed with his wife, Etta Place, and Parker aboard the British ship Herminius for Buenos Aires in Argentina. Number 1. Jesse James, the infamous outlaw. How about a story about an infamous outlaw from the Wild West? Well, here it is. Jesse Woodson James, the man behind all those bank, train, and stagecoach robberies. Now, Jesse was quite the character, even when he was alive, making headlines in the newspapers like some kind of popular hero. But his legend only grew bigger after his death. Born in Missouri in 1847, Jesse grew up in a family that owned slaves. When the Civil War came knocking, his brother Frank went off to fight for the Confederacy. But Jesse was just a young teen and too young to join the fight. So he watched from the sidelines. But things took a turn when Union militiamen roughed him up and tortured his stepfather. It's then that he got all fired up and joined a gang of guerrillas led by Bloody Bill Anderson. They caused havoc, terrorizing folks loyal to the Union. There were several atrocities committed by Jesse, including the notorious Centralia Massacre, in which 22 unarmed Union soldiers and 100 others were slaughtered. But the war ended, and many of the guerrillas went back to their peaceful lives. Not Jesse, though. He and Frank still had a fire in their bellies, fueled by the humiliation of the Confederacy's defeat. They decided to keep fighting, only now their targets were banks and such. They became notorious robbers, hitting one bank after another, and even drawing attention from the newspapers. Jesse loved the attention. We reckon he started building up a legend of himself as a Southern hero, a modern-day Robin Hood, stealing from the rich and helping the poor. But truth be told, there isn't much evidence that he shared his loot with the needy. Things took a dangerous turn when Jesse and his gang tried robbing a bank in Northfield, Minnesota. The people there weren't too keen on the former rebels, and they fought back, taking down some of Jesse's gang right then and there. Jesse and Frank barely escaped and had to lay low under assumed names. Now, Jesse couldn't resist the thrill of outlaw life, and he returned to crime in 1879. But the tides had turned, and folks weren't so sympathetic to his cause anymore. One of his gang members turned traitor and helped the authorities hunt him down. On April 3, 1882, Jesse was shot in the back of the head, meeting his end with few friends left. His mother, Zerelda James, chose this epitaph for her son. "In loving memory of my beloved son, murdered by a traitor and coward whose name is not worthy to appear here." Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey through the Old West and the lives of the deadliest gunslingers. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more exciting content.